webinar, which is practical tips on contingency plans. So last week we had a webinar where people were discussing issues and raising concerns and themes, but also fantastically bringing solutions and ideas to share with each other. And from that, we agreed that we'd do a schedule of webinars so that we could share person-to-person experience and tips during this situation that we're in at the moment. This is not formal advice and guidance, and we've got a few guests who are going to start us off on, sorry, I'm trying to move me slides at the same time. So we've got a few guests here as well who will help us to facilitate through and share their experiences. This webinar will be recorded, so other people will be able to see it publicly that aren't online this morning, and this one specifically about contingency plans, and there are other webinars that are scheduled for coming up which we'll take you through later on. So how to participate today, you'll see that you've got a panel and there is a verbal little mic there. You can put your hand up to ask a question and we'll unmute you and you'll be able to ask your question verbally. That's usually tricky when there's this amount of people on the webinar, but we'll do our best to take a couple of verbal questions. Or you could submit a written question in the question box and we'll be collecting them on an ongoing basis throughout the live webinar. Tricia is here and Tricia Nicole is going to be facilitating us through the webinar, and she'll share some tools and ideas along with other guests sharing their plans to start the discussion, and then we'll move on to questions and next steps. So our guests this morning are Tricia Nicole, Maro Griffiths and Andy Walker. Over to you, Tricia. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. How are you all doing? So I'm Tricia, and I'm going to be facilitating today. And I just wanted to start off by sharing a few things that I'm doing. So I've got my two young adult kids. They're 20 and 25, are both autistic, and I've got support from PAs around them. Like lots of people, they're really struggling with this at the moment. So making our contingency plans, my plans are very different from some of the practical things that Maro and Andy will talk to you about, but I thought it might just give a slightly different perspective. So you've got the three things that we've got up there is the questions I've asked myself. So when I started to make a contingency plan, I started off by thinking, what if? And some of my what ifs were things like, what if I get ill? What if several of my PAs have to self-isolate or get ill? What if the instances of my daughter getting really distressed increase and we need more support? What if I need to get a break so I can sleep? So I've done, and there's lots more, I've done a list of all my what ifs. And then I went back to each of the what ifs and said, what do I need? And really made myself frame that in the context of our current situation rather than perhaps the ideal that I might think back in the world where everything was ordinary. So for instance, the one about several of my PAs having to self-isolate. What do I need is I need to have support at some point every day. That was my realisation. I currently have an awful lot more than that, I'm lucky. But what I really needed was I need some enough support to keep me strong emotionally. The kids both need time away from me at some point during the day. I need some time away from them during the day, and I need enough sleep to stay strong. So that meant that rather than thinking I had to keep my entire PA team doing exactly the same hours they're doing at the moment, actually I could look at that differently. And what would it take? So it would take me to have enough people in the house, that's true. It would potentially take looking at some people who haven't worked for me for a while. So one of the things I've done is I've gone back to all the PAs who've ever worked for me, particularly over the last 5 years, and asked people if they're prepared to do some hours if necessary. So those are my three suggestions. If you're making a plan, start with what if, what are all the things that could happen? What do you need for each of those? And think creatively and think in the current moment, and then think what would it take? And sometimes with that you have to think, what would it take? Would it take? Would it take? Okay, so that's my starter for 10. Let's go next to I think we've got Maro first. So Maro, let's hear your plans. Thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, hopefully you can hear me. So
yes, I can. That's great, thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, so just for some context, and I just realized that's a very old photograph of me. In terms of my situation, so I receive 24-hour assistance 7 days a week through a personal health budget. I used to be funded by a joint package of social care and health. Now I've transitioned over to health, and so I receive my funding through the CCG, and I have a team of about 7 PAs doing obviously different level of hours, and some are just on bank as well. So the concerns really are obviously about how to remain in isolation, which is what I need to do because of my underlying health conditions, but also require support to be continuing and for people to come into the home during the period of isolation. So this creates 2 dilemmas. One is, what do I do about family members who I already live with, who maybe not provided me with support in the past, but may have to do so going forwards. And the other dilemma then is around the continuation of the existing PA support package. So what I would suggest doing is breaking this into 4 areas. One area is thinking about what happens when you're working in the home and the contingency plans around what happens when that may change. The next area is around the risk of exposure, thinking through how to address any issues that may increase because PAs are being exposed to the virus in other places, because of course we have to bear in mind that I can't expect them to self-isolate when they're not working with me because of their own responsibilities and so on. And there's also the issue around more broader plans of contingency for eventualities that may happen, such as a complete and total collapse of the PA system, and also in terms of what happens not if there is a situation where the risk of exposure is increasing, but actually if my health starts to deteriorate in this area. So there's 4 areas I would recommend there. Contingency plans for changing things in the home, thinking through about risk of exposure, thinking through when things completely collapse, and then if your own health changes. So let me just quickly go through some ideas for each of one of those areas, and then obviously I can be guided by questions later on. In terms of working in the home, the contingency ideas that we have in place is to create more sterile working environments. So there is a plan where it's recommended that PAs have a spare set of clothes which they leave in their home, in my home, and they will be washed regularly by myself, and they can change into those clothes when they come into the home. If the risk of exposure continues, then there may be the case where we may need to offer bathing facilities in the home in order to, with soapy water, in order to allow the PAs to be completely clean before they start work. The next thing to consider as well is the idea of providing equipment to PAs. So at the moment, we're only able to have access to gloves and sanitizing solutions and so on, but we're using that regularly. We're wiping down surfaces, particularly where I usually spend a lot of my time. So if I'm working from home at my desk, which is where I'm spending, obviously most of my working day, obviously that area is prioritized as a sterile environment, as is where I may sit and have my my meals during the day. It's also, as well as we're also sterilizing the car as well, inside the car as well, because different PAs will be using it to run different errands and so on. We've also, in order to address the risk of exposure, we've moved to putting my my partner, who lives in the same house as me, we've put her on the payroll, and I've confirmed with the CCG that she, even though she lives with me, she will now be acknowledged as a personal assistant in my team, so she can be somebody who may be brought in if there is a partial or complete PA collapse, and therefore we aren't affected by her losing work because she can be paid as a personal assistant, and that's been confirmed through the CCG. There's also issues around contingency planning if there's a complete breakdown. So what I've done is I've created an Excel spreadsheet with all my PAs. Each one of them get a daily phone call to check, how they are, how's their own personal situation. I've also got to take into account that if they feel too worried to leave the home because of their own health or because of the health of their families, then I have responsibility as an employer to take that seriously. So what I've done is I've created a spreadsheet with all the usual shift patterns, but I've asked each one of them, where are they flexible? Where are they available on other days if possible? And that can be changing every day. Every week. But at least we can have a weekly update on where there's flexibility. So if a PA goes down, we can move another PA into that position. We've also got a list of all historical PAs who have worked with us, who have moved on in the last 5 years. Obviously, those who are unsuitable, and that's why they've left, we won't include them. But those who have moved on to new pastures, we've gone back and we've asked each of them, are you still in the area and are you still willing to help out in an emergency situation? Some have said yes, some have said no. And lastly, there's the issue around contingency for your own health. I haven't received a letter detailing what to do in emergency situations, bizarrely, even though I'm meeting a lot of the criteria for being in the open quote vulnerable category. But what I've done already is I have a bag with all my medicine, a list of my medicines, a change of clothes, a spare sling for my hoist. All my PAs know where this is, and they've all got all the information from my consultants and GP and so on, so that if my health starts to deteriorate very rapidly, we've got the emergency equipment and we've got the emergency bag ready to go if we have to go into hospital. There's also a question of moving my PA support in with me, and I'm aware that there has been a lot of situations where those who've had to go into hospital are being denied the PAs coming with them. Obviously, this will be a real difficult battle to have, but I would remind people to inform anybody who obstructs you in terms of accessing the NHS. You need to remind them of their responsibilities under the Equality Act. The Equality Act hasn't been suspended with the coronavirus bill, which means that public bodies such as the NHS still have responsibility to make reasonable adjustments to their practices. So if their policy is a blanket stopping any visitors into the building, then you can ask, well, where are you making reasonable adjustments? Because as a disabled person, I'm protected, and I have a PA system that I need to bring with me into hospital because they can't provide the support that I need or the familiarity of my health conditions. So as I said, I would think about looking at contingency plannings in those different areas, practically in the home, planning at administration level for your PA systems, thinking about how to reduce risks of exposure wherever possible, and to also think about what happens if your own health deteriorates in a very quick manner. And I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Maro. That's really, really helpful. We'll have all the questions together at the end, if that's all right. So, Andy, can we hear yours? Are you there, Andy?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you. Fantastic. Thank you.
Good. It's really interesting what Maro said. So I want to set the scene a little bit. For those who don't know me, I'm Andy Walker. I have a high-level spinal cord injury, and normal life is a 24-hour care package, which involves usually 5 PAs. This year, we decided that'll be 4 PAs. That'll be 3 PAs that live with me for a week from Sunday to Sunday, 24/7. And then we have a morning stroke evening PA that come and assist with moving and handling, getting into bed, showering, personal care stuff, which has 4 PAs. So the first dilemma that I had was the fact that 2 of my PAs actually covered 3 weeks out of the 4 in the month actually live in Poland. So the first thing I did was I looked at the situation in the world, and we started to plan ahead really, really quickly. It brought some real dilemmas because of the need to observe not just social distancing, but making sure that we've closed things down, that we're observing good health practices. And for me, the first question is and was, what does perfect look like? In normal circumstances, you know, I would have a contingency, what I call an umbrella of PAs that I would look to have coming into my house, flexible if someone was ill or poorly. But my first major dilemma, because of my health risk, respiratory health risk with a high level spinal cord injury, is what does perfect look like? And that has been not only my dilemma, but a dilemma of my care staff and the extended family members for themselves. Because the more PAs I have coming into my house, the more exposure I'm letting myself into, but also my PA and the family members. So whereas normally I would be thinking that I need to have more PAs, my first dilemma was, you know, how many do I want? So what we decided to do, I mean, the decision was taken away from me in terms of the two guys who live in Poland, because that were, they were locked down. The morning and the evening PA was running a business outside of working for me, which is fantastic and normal. But that business involves a lot of social interaction with other people, and the dilemma is, you know, how many, you know, what risks does that put me and my sort of 24/7 staff in? Because as more people come into my house, I can't obviously test for COVID-19. And when I spoke to Imran, who's next to me now, who's my full-time PA, what we decided to do was that we were going to basically lock down together. So between myself, Imran, and his partner Noreen, I've kind of done something similar to what Maro did. I've put Noreen on the payroll. We've all moved in together, and we've essentially locked down for as long as we need to, and that puts us in a way at risk in terms of the fact that, you know, we are dependent upon each other, which leads me into the next dilemma, which is hard for anybody who's a boss, in terms of making sure that the right procedures are put into place. So it's very difficult, isn't it? We're getting lots of different sources of advice. There's lots of different things coming through on, you know, social media, WhatsApp. You know, what is good practice, what isn't? What does, in regards of procedures, rules and regulations look like? And also the other dilemma as a boss is, as an individual employee, is enforcing the rules, because these are unprecedented times. So when we talk about things like social distancing, when we've got neighbours around, when we've got loved ones, when we're talking about interacting with people, you know, whether it's in shops and what have you, it's absolutely imperative, in my opinion, that, you know, the rules and regulations are followed by everybody. But it's really hard to be assertive in a situation where, in my situation, not just for myself, but for my PA and for you know, his wife, so for my two people who provide support, is, you know, it's about being assertive in a way that doesn't upset the household, because essentially we're looking at living together for 3 months, and that really brings about a sort of a dilemma of living together for, you know, 12 weeks longer than what you normally would do, and in situations that you know, living with somebody and a wife, it brings a completely different dynamic. So that was the first thing that we looked at. So we made a decision to completely lock down and to put in certain procedures. The first thing that we looked at was obviously the fact that we really didn't want any social contacts as much as possible. So that's difficult, because the first question is, we've got to feed ourselves. And when people are talking about panic buying and what have you, and also looking at things like online shopping and the lead times for online shopping, which could be 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, we didn't even have a clue what to buy. I mean, what do you buy for 3 months type of thing? It's really, really difficult. And I was trying to put my head around this sort of 2 or 3 weeks earlier, but not everyone will have prepared like this. So it's that thing of we tried to get things in sequentially and to load things up. But what we also did was we also spoke to family members and we spoke to neighbours and said, look, you know, this is a situation we're going to be in. I explained fully that we are going to be keeping completely within our own household, not necessarily going for walks outside, like people can have the one walk a day, and that we'd be looking to set not just 1 or 2 people up, but people in and around the community. And we knew that, you know, if one of our household gets poorly, that might mean that we all kind of get poorly as well. So we looked at exactly the same as Maro. We looked at PAs that have historically worked for me, people that may want to come in and provide not just care and support, but deliveries of essentials. So the first thing was the shopping. So I've spoken to the local butchers, the local veggie store. I've for the first time looked at online shopping as well. So those are a few of the procedures. Medication was a big one. So I contacted the GP and the CCG a couple of weeks back, and I've been trying to contact them since to ask them for advice around good practice around not just gloves, but things like essential medication, and to try and load as much of that up as possible, because again, the more deliveries that we have through the door, even if they're being dropped off, we have a procedure where it's about sanitization, so hands, gloves, aprons, masks, that kind of thing. Even something simple, like drinking hot, we drink hot water. Even if anything comes into the house that hasn't been touched directly by somebody out within the house, because all deliveries that arrive in the house have now have to be put into a box outside of my property. So even though there's a risk of, you know, burglary, we've completely shut down the letterbox because people weren't observing the distancing rules. For example, the milkman, the eggman, they were still under the procedure, even though there's letters and notices on the door, which we say, you know, we need to keep we say a 4-meter distance. Please don't come to the door. People were still hitting the doorbell and what have you. So we've had to put a box outside. We've taped up the letterbox both internally and externally, and that is giving us a little bit of distance in it. And it's really, I mean, it feels like we've created like the plague situation a little bit in our household, where there's almost a cross on the door, because it's not just observing good practice in our house, which has been difficult. You know, the wearing of gloves, the contact of people who have come to the door, and trying to change that mindset. But it's also trying to influence that from, you know, the postman, which again, the postman's changed on several occasions because he's had to self-isolate. So it's trying to constantly get that that education. And as a individual employer, as a boss, and as a friend, it's really difficult, hasn't it been, Imran? It's, you know, it's been difficult to have to enforce that, to be really strict and disciplined about it, because not everyone will, you know, have, you know, my assertiveness and confidence. And even with my assertiveness and confidence, it's difficult because I'm in a situation where, you know, I certainly can't sack him, and I have no intention of wanting to. But just the procedure of, you know, disciplining things and making sure has been really, really difficult. And I'm assuming that other people have been in that dilemma. So I think it's a case of, you know, what we've done is we try to have a little bit of time where we reflect on that during the daytime. I make sure that that we're checking in with each other about how we speak to each other, and I'm trying to be really mindful about how I try to enforce the rules and how we agree the rules and how they might need to change. So we do that over meal times. We make sure that we have a family meal, that we make sure that we have you know, time together where we're not talking about the coronavirus and procedures, where we have like a bit of downtime and a bit of fun together. So that's the first thing. But of course, it's all about planning ahead. So the next dilemma is what happens if somebody does get poorly. And that's a major concern for all of us. First and foremost, because you know, we're good friends with each other, but also the fact that, you know, I have this 24/7 care need. So the first thing that I did was I tried to engage with my GP, my case manager, the CCG, even MPs, family members, as I mentioned before, carers, which have been worked for me previously, and PAs that have worked for me previously, and also family members. But these are unprecedented times, so it could be that people may have to step in. So, for example, my entire family, and I've got 2 brothers, 1 sister, and, you know, extended family members, all of whom are very close, and mum and dad, uncle, aunties, cousins. The entire family are in lockdown, are in self-isolation because of the health needs, coughing, and what have you. So, you know, that's completely gone out the window for at least 2 or 3 weeks. Should someone need to come in. So I thought about it positively, and I thought, what do we do if I've got to get somebody in who's never been to this house? So we started virtually training people, and what we did was we started to FaceTime people, volunteers, friends who I would never normally want to be carers and PAs and people within my support, but people who have volunteered, said, if you're in trouble, you know, health aside, you know, I can come in and help with some shifts, maybe come in and live with you. You know, we will work something out, Andy, because we love you and we're concerned about you. But I won't have a clue what I'm doing. So we've started to, I've videoed. We've not been doing that on FaceTime yet, but we've videoed the personal care routine. So that's my bowel management and what have you. Even things like the showering, because there's a procedure for everything. You know, getting up, dressing, that kind of thing. So we've videoed some of this. Some of this we've FaceTimed, the morning routine and moving and handling. Simple things like having the care plan, similar to what Maro said. So it's you know, it's the essential things, but also the simple things, pulling my jeans down. Things like understanding that for a suprapubic catheter, that even a kink pipe can be a life and death thing. So what is a catheter? What is a pipe? Going through that and just reminding myself what those essential things are. You know, being the expert in my situation, even though I do things day to day, I'm doing things day to day, I'm aware, with people who understand and know my routine, or a new PA normally who would come in and have shadowing and what have you, and that isn't going to be possible. What happens if I get poorly? And Miro touched upon that really intelligently. So I've got an essentials crib sheet. Reasonable adjustments is something which I was in hospital. They were fantastic in North Manchester over Christmas with allowing my PA to come in. But I have to understand that, you know, it's, you know, times have changed, and as much as I might want my PA to come in, that might not be possible. So we've put together a specific essentials crib sheet for that. Things like, again, like the moving and handling, there'll be the video that can be used, and the rest of it, which we've already set up for any PA that might need to come into my house. But it's even more simple things like just the personalised side of things, how people feed me, the fact that I might want to choose, you know, not just what I eat, but how I eat that food, and just simple things, what's important to me, and to have that available so that when I go into hospital, or if I was to go into hospital for any reason, then, you know, we've got that set up. And that is exactly what Miro expressed before. That's in an emergency bag, so we're good to go. So it feels like, you know, you're waiting to give birth or something, because you do have the same things, Miro. It's funny, but things like, you know, clothing, your crib sheet, that kind of thing, you're literally waiting just in case. So I think, again, that seems to be good practice. The next one is just the dilemma of the fear, the emotional side of things, dealing with isolation, and, you know, contingency for that. What happens if, I mean, at the moment I'm feeling quite positive. I've had a spinal injury, which meant that I've had to kind of almost self-isolate before, although there was a lot more contact in terms of physical contact in the spinal unit. I was in there for 8 months. However, my PA wasn't, and neither was his wife. So these are unprecedented times for themselves. People are scared about the virus, so Disability Rights UK website have contact groups available for people. Social media, it can be a scary thing as well. I think people should use that for essential things, but in terms of keeping in contact, being part of a group, you know, getting involved in things like this, and having people at organisations such as In Control and individuals through Centres for Independent Living that might not be open, but the contacts might still be there. So you can have a mentor, a friend, and somebody to talk to outside of that household that can sometimes feel so enclosed and small at times. For me, it's about finding a purpose. That's one of the things. So doing things like this has been excellent for me, but also, you know, running the motivational speaking business, I feel like that helps me quite a lot in terms of my emotional health. I can't do that anymore, so I'm ringing people up. I'm trying to be someone who gets advice, but also you know, spreads that advice out in terms of good practice and just being a friend. I'm also trying to get jobs done, so business things, websites. I've organised my sock drawer about 54 times already, but of course staying in touch. I'm missing my family and I'm missing my mates. So FaceTime, I'm setting up a bloody online quiz, a FaceTime quiz. Things like Monopoly, I'm trying to learn something, I'm trying to do more reading. Netflix, of course, but also not trying to contact the same people all the time, trying to spread out contacts, getting back in touch with old friends. And the other thing is that living in such a kind of a confined space in the household, I'm trying to use the space. I'm trying to get into rooms that I've not been in before, not just organising them, but kind of sitting and spending time in them. And I'm trying to find a way of getting some form of a routine. So, you know, trying to get up at a normal time, trying to make sure that we do things like plan our meals and plan food and have things to look forward to. So, for example, you know, things like the quiz, things like helping my godchildren, helping my nephews and nieces with the homework, finding out what they've been learning, trying to get them to educate me a little bit, and just delving into areas where I've not been before in terms of just things to do and keeping my brain active, my mind active, and again, trying to have virtual contacts rather than physical contacts. So
brilliant, Andy. I'm gonna interrupt you because we've only got another half an hour. And I want people to have a chance to ask some questions. So that's brilliant. Loads of really good suggestions.
My last one was really, and I was just about to finish anyway, but the last thing was really just to be aware that also, you know, the PAs and carers are also in the situation. So for those that aren't working, I'm in contact with them, and the other contingency is making sure that I've still got a team after this is all over, and making sure, you know, that I'm aware of the financial pressures of the guys in Poland and the emotional and fears that they're going through as well, and checking in. All right, thanks guys.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Andy. Okay, so we've got a few questions that came in before the webinar, and I think that we've kind of touched on some of these already. So protective equipment. What protective equipment should we be trying to source for me and my PAs to wear? Now, at the moment, Maro, you were saying that you're just using gloves and you're not looking at masks still. What from either of you? What's your advice at the moment for people? I guess there's two bits there. Whilst you're all well still.
Do you want to start, Maro? Well, from my point of view, I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have as little contact as possible, but certainly it's things like gloves. Obviously, I think I mentioned aprons. We haven't gone into face masks because we are observing the 4 metre distance. I'm trying to avoid like the elements of walking. I'm more going around my property because I just think for myself any kind of contact is difficult, and things like having the postal system and deliveries away from the house. But yeah, I mean, things like we've got alcohol wipes everywhere. We've got reminders and sheets on doorways. We're trying to keep our doors open so we're not having to constantly open the doors and touch things. And the difficulty is supplies. So it's about trying to get, you know, as many gloves, aprons, and what have you. Masks at the moment, because we've been told, you know, unless the mask is an excellent sort of you know, medical mask, that they don't work. But what we're trying to do is minimise contact. So we're trying to use, you know, the local shops, delivery services, online for anything that we do and might need going forwards. Things like milk and bread, and we're trying to get people to leave that at the door and observing the wiping down and the gloves, and that's what we've done basically. Anything else in there?
Yeah, Maro, anything?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would just recommend wiping down surfaces before you use them. You know, it's better to be overcautious. It's important that we don't panic, because when we panic, we can, you know, start to make crisis-driven decisions, and that can lead to problems. So it's better to be overcautious than anything else. So it's a case of wiping down surfaces. You know, having hand sanitizers around when you can. Another option as well is, although it's not necessarily with PPE, but it's probably a mechanism before you get to that, is to have a collection of thermometers, so PAs can check their temperature regularly, just to see, you know, how that's doing, and if it's going quite high, particularly, you know, before they start a shift and so on. You also, yeah, as Andy said, you know, think about deliveries, taking in papers. So when we have paper, you know, when we have letters coming through, we'll pick it up with gloves. We'll leave it in an area for a few hours. The reading at the moment is that the virus on cardboard or paper only lasts for a few hours. So leaving it in an area. And you can also, if you're wanting to access equipment, it's worthwhile speaking to your funder. So, you know, social services or the CCG. Skills for Care have written some information about a central depository system for accessing PPE equipment. If you go on the Skills for Care website, they give you a number and an email address to use. But I'd probably go through your CCG and request the types of equipment that you need. Also, if you have a personal budget, it may be worthwhile informing your CCG that you're going to use part of it if you've got surplus surplus funding to buy some of this equipment as well, because obviously you would acknowledge it as a health need in this period of crisis. Again, but just remember as well, you know the data at the moment is suggesting that, you know, this is not airborne. So it's about a virus going in through entry places like the eyes, nose, and mouth. So, you know, if you're touching things outside, don't touch your face. Wash your hands wash your hands thoroughly, and that will lose any risk of it coming from your hand into an area where it can then come into your health, you know, into your body. So again, be precautious, but don't overly panic. Just think about methodically, what do I need to clean? What do I need to check? What is coming into my home that I haven't had control over? And therefore you can make some decisions there.
Brilliant, thanks, Maro. I think you already covered, both of you covered the situation about PAs changing their footwear and clothing as soon as they enter your flat. You certainly said that was something to think about. So I think that would be a yes. That's a useful thing to do. Is that fair, you guys?
Well, I think so. I think having the option for a change of clothing, but also, you know, if you've got capacity and you've got space, you may want to ask. I mean, obviously you can't force, but you may want to ask a PA whether they would feel comfortable showering or bathing in your home before they start work. So you could obviously get rid of any additional risk of contamination in that sense. So that would be a case of PA comes in maybe half an hour early, uses a bathing or shower, comes, you know, gets changed in different clothing, thoroughly cleans the area. So that therefore you've got, you know, no risk then of somebody coming into the home. Brilliant,
thanks.
And Trish, I fully agree with that, Trish.
Right.
All the above. My situation is slightly different. We are living together, but I'm advising people who are in situations where people are having pop-ins or what have you, very much to observe as much of that as possible. It's not always possible for them to have a shower, but it's great advice from me where people are, I mean, and in themselves, people are actually happy to do that, because it's not just protecting you as a client, but also the PAs and their families. And it's about how you deliver that message often, do it in a positive way, in a fun way, and in an educational way.
And just to say as well, you know, this is about, you know, everyone has got their own level of risk and concern, and obviously implications for your own health. So you make a decision, you know, there's no one size fits all approach here. You make your decision based on your level of risk, your level of concern, and your health, and the workforce that you have with you. So what works for me or for Andy parts of it may work for you, parts of it may not work for you. But it's about you feeling comfortable in your own place and making sure that you have as much control over how things are done and where they're done as best as possible.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. Miro, just before the call, we were talking about this next question from Chris's mum about making testing available. Do you just want to say a little bit about your understanding of the testing situation?
Sure. So the key thing is there's a question here about why aren't tests being made possible, being available for PAs. Firstly, we can see that there's a real lapse of testing for many key workers in the UK, and that's an issue that needs a lot of scrutiny now, and obviously after this situation is resolved. Because also, just before I get onto that, it's important to acknowledge this situation will be resolved one day, and that gives us hope, and we have to be hopeful that we're moving in a progressive direction. So questions need to be asked about how we plan for things like this in the future with PA support systems which are in operation. So the problem is that the testing isn't widespread, and therefore PAs and often those who receive funding through self-directed support are often forgotten about, because there's always that question of where do they fit into the system? Are they incorporated within the NHS or social services? Are they outside of that? So again, that's a question that we need to think about going forward. Currently, the thing about this testing is to recognize there's two types of testing being designed. There's testing for those who currently have COVID-19, and there's testing that is being developed that will tell you whether you have had COVID-19. Now, I think we should be more hopeful about thinking about having the testing to tell you whether you have had COVID-19, because I think once that testing is developed, and the latest information was we're looking at a few weeks to a few months away from that, that we can then pressure on local authorities and CCGs to give us enough tests for the number of PAs that we have, and then when we think that a PA has had COVID-19, we can test, get the information sent off, get the information back, and then on the basis that they've had it, we can then start to rebuild the support package, particularly if you started to withdraw from having support from numerous people, or you've gone from PAs living out to PAs living in. But again, my advice would be your PAs are classed as critical workers. You should be demanding documentation to prove that they're critical workers, particularly so that they can still access services and bypass authorities outside of the home. But in the meantime, keep putting pressure on, saying, are you going to make available testing for my PAs? I would just suggest regular emails, keep in contact with your CCG, with your local authority. The point is that this is such a complex problem. It's easy to be forgotten about in the system. It's not a case of being deliberately ignored. It's about being forgotten about. So keeping up that pressure and having that conversation is really important. But what I would say on this as well is, if you have often been in a situation where, again, this is no criticism of anybody, but if you've often been in a situation where you've constantly felt like you have to ask for things in terms of support, funding, changes to your support plan, and so on, start moving towards a position of saying that you are informing and demanding. It's this is a crisis situation. There's no point now waiting weeks and months for a decision to be made. You want to now start to say, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it, and if you have a problem, here is a time frame that you have to inform me of your concerns. Otherwise, I'm going ahead and doing this. So I would recommend start demanding and start asking questions about, when can I have access to this? When it's going to be available to me? Why you want it in terms of testing or other aspects of your care plan, and just keep the regular contact up. So then hopefully when things are available, they will start to be delivered to you.
Brilliant, thanks Miro, thanks Sandy. Okay, questions folks. So you've got two ways of asking a question. You can type your questions in, or you can raise your hand if you want to actually ask us your questions. So I'm just looking, Julie, I can't see any any questions there at all yet. Has anybody typed any in? So
yeah, there's quite a few. So
right.
some we've already answered. So there was one about the six paid carers coming in and what are the options, and Miro took us through some of the answers to that. So anything else that you want, please come back. There's other things that are very specific around employment law. So we've put a link up to a very helpful document that's been done by Pendrell's Trust that's around employment issues about, you know, if my PA goes sick, do they get statutory sick pay? Does the retention scheme apply? But there's also a very specific employers webinar that we're doing on the 1st of April, where we've got a senior solicitor from Disability Rights Service, Disability Law Service, I apologise, who's coming and helping talk us through more about employment law. And then there's a couple of specifics that have come through. So one's from Faye. One of my PAs has no spleen and her husband is also diabetic. She feels that she should be self-isolating, but is yet to receive confirmation from a doctor or the NHS about doing so. Until this happens, she's not entitled to SSP. Any advice on this would be appreciated. I mean, my pragmatic view on this is that if she feels she's going to have symptoms and she's in danger, then she can choose to self-isolate, and as part of that, she could say she's symptomatic, therefore is entitled to SSP. I don't know what your view on this is. It's certainly something we can bring up with the employment lawyer.
I think just, I mean, again, my background's not in law, so I wouldn't want to speculate on law. What I would say is that let's think creatively. So, are there jobs that you require as a PA user that may not necessarily need the PA to be with you to do so? So, could the PA do something from home in order to help you with your needs? Is there some of my PAs, for example, change my clothing because of my impairment needs? They may help with kind of restocking equipment and so on, and making changes and maintenance to equipment. So, can things be delivered to them so they can carry on doing things for you, and don't have to necessarily be with you? The key thing is, protection of life is ultimately the priority here, but obviously it's a balance between the PA user and the PA. If the person is concerned, and based on the information and the guidance on the government website about who qualifies for open quote vulnerable category, then I suggest that they look through that and they make their decision. You as a PA user, I don't think you should be in the position of making the decision for them whether they isolate or not. It's up to them whether they isolate or not, and once they've made their decision, then you have to act accordingly to that.
Brilliant, thanks. Do we have other questions, Julie?
Yeah, so there's another one from Andy. Hi, Andy. And Andy's saying that he's in the process of shifting to minimum wage for his PAs, and given the emergency situation now, can he still ask about the impact of the increase in minimum wage and get his budget increased to do this? And then the other side is that now the emergency legislation's gone through, and the council might have reduction should he pursue this or not. And I think that's your be assertive message, Miro, if you want to just talk through that again, that actually, what Miro and I and others have been saying is be assertive in this situation and tell them what you're going to do. I think in this case, he would need his budget increased in order to do what he needs to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, it was breaking up a little bit, so I didn't hear the total totality of the question. But absolutely, the thing is that it's always important that when you make a demand, don't see it as a request. See it as a demand, because ultimately you are the expert of your own support and the requirements of your support. So it's about you stating clearly what it is that you are demanding, and then stating very succinctly but precise why is it that you're demanding this, and that gives a justification then. And then the last part is, when you're making a demand and providing a justification, you also need to say, if you have a problem with this, this is the time scale that I need you to respond to me by, but also, if you do have a problem with this, show me where in the statutory guidance or indeed the legislation that what I'm demanding is not appropriate. And quite often, when you demand them to show where in the guidance or in the legislation that there's a problem with your request, quite often they don't actually have an answer to this, and therefore they usually do back down. So again, it's about being methodical and thorough in your demand. You know, if you go through the process of I really need this because, and you're trying to do it on morality and ethical grounds, you might be a little bit stuck because we're talking about bureaucracy and policy. So I would, very much. Sorry, yes, I would very much to say, make clear your demand, make clear your justification for your demand, and make clear that if they've got a problem, they show you in the policy or the statutory guidance or the legislation why it's a problem what you are demanding.
Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, with Andy's case, it's a general situation that would have happened even before the crisis. So what I'd do, Andy, is get in touch with them now, because even though the legislation's gone through, there's no local authorities that have activated the turn-on switch to use those emergency measures yet. So I would get that request in quick and ask for them to make sure that you've got enough budget to cover a minimum wage for your staff at this time, and ask them to do that urgently. So, you know, try and get some of these requests in now before any local authority do switch on those powers of emergency of the Corona Bill.
I think the only thing I'd add there, Andy, is that there's something about how you word it as well, is that of course you are needing to do this. It's not like I'd like to do it, it's of course I need to make sure that the minimum wage is there, and I assume of course that you will support this. So it's kind of like something about, for me, about the tone, that you're not apologetic in any way, shape or form. As Maro talks about demand, I think as we've moved to the position of not asking permission to do things, definitely. Was there another question, Julie?
Just having a look.
There's a question about clarification about Disability Act. Do you want me to pick that up?
Yes, please.
So there's a question here about clarification, please, in using the Disability Act and new legislation around care and support. So again, this is something that you may want to pick up on with your with subsequent seminars. But my understanding is that even though the coronavirus bill is deeply problematic, and arguably, most assessments now, particularly by scholars, are showing that there is no economic gain to be made by these changes. So it's really perplexing why they're doing this. The Equality Act itself, so the protection against discrimination for certain characteristics, including disabled people, that in itself hasn't been suspended. So where you are coming up with problems in terms of accessing services, so for example, if you need to go into a hospital and you need your PA support package to come with you, but hospital is saying, well, you can't have anybody else from outside coming in, you have to then say, well, you are bound by the Equality Act as a public service to make reasonable adjustments. So show me what reasonable adjustments you are making in order so that I as a disabled person is not being discriminated against. So, if you require, adjustments in the way that services are being provided, and that includes in the community as well. If you think about when you're going out and doing your errands or your shopping in relation to, isolation and changes in the way that you've previously done these sorts of activities, make sure that you are reminding people about their Equality Act responsibilities. My understanding is that hasn't been postponed or suspended because of this new coronavirus bill. So public bodies, companies, services, and so on still have a legal responsibility to make reasonable adjustments to include and ensure the participation of disabled people. So if you identify as a disabled person, you meet the legal qualifier in the Equality Act, there is still an expectation that they will make reasonable adjustments. And that's why so for example, I have got this document, a printed document on the Equality Act around responsibility of reasonable adjustments. That's in my my bag in case I have to go to hospital. Because if I go in, my partner or my PAs, who obviously know my needs much better than anybody else who has had no experience of my condition or my support needs, they are much better placed to provide the ongoing support to me in hospital. And an arbitrary policy decision to stop visitors into a hospital should be adjusted to take account of the specific needs of the disabled person.
Yeah, as far as I know, advocacy is still in there as well. So if people are in that situation, use the advocacy caveat as well. There's just a few more. One is around how do you get documentation to prove that you're a key worker or a critical worker if they don't have NHS badges or papers. If you're on a personal health budget, you should have had a letter from your CCG confirming that. And councils have just started to issue those letters.
Just to add to that, Julie. So I as I said, I've got personal health budget. I didn't get any documentation from my CCG as of yet. But what I did was I sent an email to my lead person at the CCG, copying in the civil society organisation that's responsible for the administration of the PHP. So on the Wirral, we have the Wirral CCG. We also have the Cheshire Centre for Independent Living, which provides a kind of administration and advocacy support around the personal health budget. I emailed both. I said, Department of Health and Social Care is saying that PAs on PHP budgets are classed as key workers. I'm aware of other people in other CCG areas are getting proof that they are key workers through the form of identity letters. Here's a list of my PAs. I need the letters now. And within 6 hours, I was given individual letters for all my PAs saying that they are classed as key workers, critical workers, funded through a personal health budget. In the first instance, contact the personal health budget holder, i.e., me, Maro Griffiths. If you want to validate that the person has a personal health budget or that the person's a critical worker, speak to this contact person at the CCG. All my PAs are told you must carry this with you at all times, either on the tablet, on the phone, or on paper. Have your identity card with you or some kind of photographic ID. And so if you're stopped by authorities or services, you can show this and you can get through any obstacles. Because what I would say is do this now, even if you think that things are working okay, because it's likely that we're going to move to a little bit more stringent lockdowns where there may be authorities stopping people, asking them where they're going, why they're outside, and so on. So having this information now before there's a kind of bottleneck where people are all asking for this information, do it now so that all your PAs have this information with them and that they can therefore bypass any obstacles going forwards.
So I think CCGs are a bit ahead of the game in this. Local authorities, you can do the same and ask. Some other families are actually creating their own. So because they are the actual employer themselves, they're actually doing name badges saying, I'm a critical worker doing social care, or I'm a critical worker on behalf of a personal health budget, and then they're just putting their own name and number as an employer, plus the council or the NHS contact. So some people are doing various amounts of creating their own as an employer to your employees, or doing exactly what Miro said. Do you want me to do a couple of others, Tricia, quickly?
We've got 2 minutes, so.
We've got 2 minutes, so we've got Katie on the line. Hi, Katie. She's saying she's totally isolated and nobody's coming in and out of the house apart from exercise and walking the dogs. But the PAs are desperate to know about whether they're going to be laid off or we follow the furlough line. I think most people are following the furlough line, Katie, and there's a specific webinar next Wednesday on the 1st of April around employment issues. And there's also some really helpful stuff from Penrose Trust on the Be Human side. Another quick one is there easy read information for people with learning disabilities. If you go on to Learning Disability England, there's some fantastic resources specifically that are much more easy read and helpful for people with learning disabilities.
Brilliant, thank you. That's it. We're just coming up to 12 o'clock. So thanks ever so much, Andy, Miro. Thanks for collecting the questions, Julie. So this will be available to listen to again, to share with other people if you need it to. But thanks ever so much, everybody, for taking part. And sign up for the other webinars that Julie's told you about as well. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Trish. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.